So we will begin with a short presentation, just giving you the lay of the land when it comes to immigration in the US. And let's first test your knowledge of immigration in the US. We're going to bring up a poll, so if you can interact with your screen and let us know, what do you think is the total foreign-born share of the US population? Let's see. There we go. What do you think is the total foreign-born share of the US population? Is it 53.7%, 33.7%, 23.7%, or 13.7%? Vote now on your screen, please. Interesting. So most of you think it's about 33.7%, a third of the US population. And the fewest number of you think that it's 13.7%, which is actually the right answer. We are led to believe that immigration is such a massive issue, and terms like invasion and infestation and swarming the border. The total foreign-born population is 13.7%. And so this question then, which state experienced the fastest growth in its immigrant population from 2010 to 2016? Which state experienced the fastest growth in its immigrant population? Not largest, fastest. Is it California, Florida, North Dakota, or West Virginia? So most of you think that it's North Dakota, but it's sort of evenly split. Actually, yes, North Dakota has experienced the fastest growth of any state in its foreign-born population in the past decade or so. Immigrants go where the jobs are, and there are lots of jobs in North Dakota right now. West Virginia is actually number 2. So, as I said, the total foreign-born share of the U.S. population is 13.7%. So that's 1 in every 8 U.S. residents is actually foreign-born. As you may have known, the undocumented immigrant population had been decreasing in the past few years, even though we've really swarmed the southwest border with more and more Border Patrol officers. So you can see a disparity there in the decline of undocumented immigrants and the rise of how much money we are spending at the US-Mexico border. Unfortunately, for the past few years, we've resettled a record low number of refugees, despite there being a world refugee crisis. So as you can see, we've resettled almost up to 250,000 refugees at one point. Last year, the figure was less than 20,000. One thing that we need to address is the fact that immigrants come here with the intention of working. The majority of immigrants come here in their prime working age, so between 25 and 55, for instance. And you can see compared to the US born, there's actually a deficit of people in those age groups. So that is why immigrants are more likely to work. They have a larger presence in our labor force than the US born. Again, they come with the intention of working, of making a better life for themselves and their children. And they're spread across many, many different industries, but you can see them concentrated heavily in both very high-skilled areas like computer and mathematics, architecture and engineering, life, physical, and social sciences, as well as the low-skilled areas, so personal care and service, farming, fishing, and forestry, food prep and serving, and of course, building and grounds maintenance. Many of these industries were essential to helping us get through and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So whereas they make up 13.7% of the US population, they make up 42.5% of agricultural workers and 22% of food service workers. They kept America clean during the pandemic. Again, almost half of maid service workers are foreign-born, and a quarter of janitors are immigrants. And of course, we see them heavily concentrated in healthcare. Who hasn't had the experience of seeing a foreign-born doctor or pharmacist or nurse or home health aide? So they make up 28.5% of physicians in the US. Another important thing to note, and you may see this in your own family's immigration story, immigrants populate and revitalize cities and neighborhoods. So in Boston here, we saw that in Fields Corner. where immigrants moved in decades ago, mostly Vietnamese immigrants, because the rents were cheap. The area had experienced tremendous economic decline. But over the course of a generation or so, they were able to open up storefronts, restaurants, grocery stores, convenience stores, and of course, nail salons. And today, the area is cleaner, it's safer, it has been economically revitalized. This is not an uncommon story. And looking at the cities that you come from, a lot of cities declined economically in the 1960s to the 1980s. And you can see a whole list of them here. Many of them experienced tremendous population decline. So look at St. Louis with a 40% decline in population. Of those cities, about 14 rebounded with an increase in population. These are those cities. And you can see that they rebounded with an increase in immigrants. Immigrants moved into these cities and were able to open up mom and pop shops, be able to start businesses, satellite businesses to support other businesses. And these areas were economically revitalized with immigrants. So it does prove that immigrants cause economic growth, but if any city or town is planning to grow without immigrants, it's useful to keep in mind that there are no examples of major American cities that were able to grow without immigrants. And finally, we talked about businesses. The counter to the narrative that you may have heard, immigrants create jobs. The act of migrating, if you think about it, is itself an entrepreneurial act, leaving everything behind, taking a risk, not knowing what to expect, but hoping for better. And as a result, immigrants are actually twice as likely to start businesses in the US. In certain parts of the country, like in Michigan, they are 3 times as likely to start a business. Again, less than 14% of the population, but 17% of the labor force, 19% of business owners overall. And as you can see on any main street in the US, from restaurants and grocery stores, all the different kinds of cuisines that we can have, they own 30% of our main street businesses. And those small business is the big creator of jobs in the US. This is not a unique story. Immigrants have always been entrepreneurial. They've always started businesses. And some of America's most iconic brands, when you think of Coors Bear and Budweiser, Levi's Jeans, up to TJ Maxx and Yahoo and Comcast and PayPal, all of these businesses had immigrant founders. And I do want to stress Moderna and Pfizer will both have immigrant founders. And without them, we may not have had the first two vaccines. So again, this is not an uncommon story from Field Corner in Dorchester to the north end of Boston to the 9th Street Italian Market in Philadelphia. Immigrants move in where the rents are cheap and they revitalize areas. They become better educated. They create more jobs. They gain more skills and as a result pay more in taxes. So over the course of a generation or two, they become incredible contributors to our economy. And I do want to make the point that immigrants are supporting our social safety systems. So in 1950, there were 16 workers to every 1 person in retirement. In 2015, there were 3. Things like Medicare, Social Security, immigrants are paying into these. And if you didn't know, unless immigrants become citizens themselves, they do not qualify to receive, for instance, Social Security benefits. Since the 90s, many different benefits that immigrants were able to have were cut. So I do want to emphasize that you all are educators, and sometimes you may think that your work is very challenging with foreign-born students. Over the course of one generation, many of the immigrants in the US, and I draw your attention to Mexican immigrants, the children of immigrants are able to achieve a level of educational attainment that far exceeds what their parents had. And this is the opportunity that America provides for them. They become much better educated than their parents. They get to go to community college or 4-year colleges. They are able to pay more in taxes as a result, get better jobs. This is the promise of America to these people. And just a short update, as you know, for the past 4 years, immigration policies had become very restrictive, particularly regarding refugees. But the Biden administration is working to expand sponsorship eligibility of family members. As you know, family immigration and reunification is the cornerstone of American immigration policy. U visas, which are for victims of violence who cooperate with the police, will be able to bring their children. A judge ruled in December that for the first time in quite a while, first-time applicants can apply for DACA, that is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, children who were brought here by their parents when they were underage. But only about 800 out of 50,000 have been approved thus far. This is an indicator of a greater backlog of visa applications. And the Biden administration does promise a pathway to permanent status for DACA recipients. And while the pandemic halted a lot of naturalization ceremonies and processing time had doubled under the last administration, the current administration does plan to reduce barriers to naturalization. And a bit of trivia, currently, Cleveland is the best city to become a citizen. You only have to wait about 4 months. Seattle is the worst at 16 months before you can become a citizen. And the record low number of refugee resettlement that had taken place under the Trump administration, now we are seeing an increase in the number of refugees who will be resettled here. As you may have heard, there has been an increase in migrants at the US-Mexican border. Currently, there's a backlog of over 1 million asylum cases, and most of those migrants at the border are applying for asylum. And under the Trump presidency, issues of, for instance, domestic and gang violence were not taken into consideration. Under the new administration, they will be taken into consideration in asylum applications. So again, I want to emphasize that our research institute at George Mason can provide you with free fact sheets about the foreign born in your locality. You can request them online. It's very easy. And I hope you understand now that immigration to the US is and has always been something that has benefited us economically, has enriched us culturally, and has strengthened us. This is not a new story or an old story, it is a continued story.